She was a black woman who asked for nothing from anyone. She woke before the city. She unlocked her own gate. She built beauty with her bare hands every single morning in a shop that had been in her family for 41 years, and she was 3 months away from losing it forever. She wasn't famous. She wasn't powerful. She was just a woman with soil-darkened hands and her grandmother's shears, trying to keep something irreplaceable alive in a world that had decided her block was worth more without her in it. And then, 2 men noticed her. The first was an heir, young, charming, with a gray blazer and a smile that had never once failed him, and a last name printed on the very lease that was slowly strangling her shop. The second was a Korean Mafia boss, silent, immovable, a man with dark tattoos climbing his neck and eyes that had seen things that don't get spoken about in polite rooms. A man who walked into her shop one morning, looked at her flowers, and bought every single one of them. Not a bouquet, not an arrangement. Everything. The entire shop, stripped bare by nightfall. One man flirted with her. The other bought out her inventory out of what looked like jealousy, but was really something far older, far heavier, and far more broken than either of them knew how to say out loud. 2 powerful men, one woman who had never asked to be anyone's prize, and a decision that neither of them saw coming. But what she did next didn't just surprise them. It dismantled everything they thought they understood about power, about saving someone, and about what it truly means to love something without trying to own it. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There is a particular kind of quiet that lives inside a flower shop just before it opens. Not silence. Silence is empty. This is something fuller. The rustling of stems being sorted, the soft percussion of water hitting the base of a metal bucket, the green and living smell of things that were still rooted in the earth 24 hours ago. Amara had grown up inside that quiet. She had learned to read it the way other children learned to read words, one petal at a time, one morning at a time, beside a woman with soil-darkened hands and a voice like warm tea. Her grandmother had opened this shop 41 years ago with $300, a borrowed table, and the absolute certainty that beauty was not a luxury. It was a necessity, a survival tool. You bring flowers to the sick because the living need to know that something still blooms. You bring flowers to the dead because the grieving need to know the same thing. Amara had inherited the shop, the philosophy, and the debt. The debt was newer, 3 years old, precise and suffocating. Born the day Whitmore Properties acquired the block and decided that what this neighborhood really needed was another glass tower and a ground-floor retail suite at 4 times the previous lease. She had signed the new contract because she had no choice. She had smiled at the property manager because she was raised to be gracious, even when she was furious. And every month since then, she paid what she could and carried what she couldn't, and told herself that her grandmother had survived worse. That Tuesday morning began like any other. She unlocked the front gate at 7:15, turned the hand-painted sign from closed to open, and started arranging the day's first display. White ranunculus, eucalyptus, and a handful of dried lavender that smelled like memory. She was halfway through when the bell above the door rang and a man she had never seen walked in. He was tall, casually expensive in the way of people who have never had to think about the cost of their clothes. His blazer was the color of storm clouds. His hair was the kind of artfully disheveled that takes effort to maintain. He looked around her shop with the expression of someone who had wandered somewhere unexpected and wasn't sure yet whether he wanted to leave. She didn't look up from the ranunculus. "Can I help you?" He said he needed flowers. She asked what kind. He paused for a long moment, the way people do when they want to seem thoughtful rather than admit they have no idea, and said he wanted something that didn't look like he was trying too hard. She looked up then. His eyes were a pale, unsettled gray. He was smiling the smile of a man who had always been told his smile worked. It almost worked on her, too. She was only human. She built him an arrangement in silence. Cream garden roses, a single stem of white sweet pea, and just enough greenery to make it look like it came from a garden rather than a shop. He watched her hands the entire time. When she handed it to him, he paid without looking at the price, and then lingered at the door for a beat too long, like he was waiting for her to say something that would give him a reason to stay. She didn't. What she didn't know was that outside, on the other side of the street, a black SUV had been parked for exactly 4 minutes. And inside it, a man who never wasted time sat completely still, watching the shop's glass front with the focused patience of someone who had learned long ago that everything worth having requires you to wait. He had not intended to stop today. He had been passing through. But something about the window display, white orchids arranged in a way that no professional had taught, a way that was old and instinctive and specific, had made him tell the driver to pull over. He hadn't looked at orchids in 19 years. He watched the tall man in the gray blazer step out of the shop, flowers in hand, still smiling. And something shifted, very quietly, behind his eyes. The following morning, Sebastian Whitmore came back. He had told himself, on the drive home the night before, that he wouldn't. He had flowers already. The arrangement sat on his kitchen counter looking exactly as effortless as she had promised. And he had no occasion, no recipient, no reasonable excuse. But reasonable excuses had never been the thing that moved him. He was a man who had spent 31 years doing what was expected of him in every room that mattered. And somewhere in the accumulated weight of that performance, he had developed a quiet, persistent hunger for the one thing money and inheritance could not manufacture: the feeling of being in a room where no one knew his last name. Amada's shop was that room. She didn't greet him with the particular warmth that people reserved for the Whitmore name. She didn't straighten her posture, or soften her expression, or recalibrate her whole personality the way people did in his father's offices. She looked up, registered his presence with the mild acknowledgement of someone noting the weather, and went back to trimming the stems of a batch of sunflowers with a pair of shears that looked older than he was. "Back already?" she said. Not a question. "I need something for my office," he said. "What kind of office?" "The kind that needs something alive in it." She considered this seriously, which he hadn't expected. Most people would have smiled at the line. She reached for a bundle of deep burgundy dahlias without hesitation, added 2 stems of Japanese anemone, wrapped the base in brown paper and twine, and slid it across the counter. He looked at it for a moment. "You didn't ask what I liked." "I asked what your office needed," she said. "That's different." He came back Thursday. He came back the following Tuesday. He learned, gradually, that she opened at 7:15 and closed at 6, that she sourced most of her stock from a small farm 2 hours outside the city, that she had opinions about peonies that bordered on theological, and that she laughed with her whole face, but rarely for long, like joy was something she allowed herself in small, careful portions. He did not tell her who he was, not immediately, And the longer he waited, the more the omission began to feel like something he had done on purpose. Which, if he was honest with himself in the right kind of light, he had. What he didn't know was that 2 blocks away, in a building that looked like a hotel and functioned as something considerably more complicated, Kang Ji-ho had given his assistant a single instruction: find out who owns the flower shop on Mercer Street. The answer came back within the hour. Amada Ose, 27 years old, sole proprietor, inherited the business from her grandmother. Current lease held by Whitmore Properties, renewed 18 months ago at an adjusted rate that the assistant described carefully, and Ji-ho listened to without expression. He asked one more question. His assistant answered it. Ji-ho said nothing further and returned to the documents on his desk. But the next morning, before the city had fully woken, he was standing outside her shop. She saw him through the glass before she unlocked the gate. A man in a black suit, standing very still on the pavement, not looking at his phone, not checking his watch, just standing. There was something in the quality of his stillness that was different from waiting. It was more like occupying. Like he had decided this square of pavement was his for the moment, and the moment would end when he decided it would. She opened the gate. He walked in without being invited, which should have bothered her more than it did. He moved through the shop the way people move through places they are memorizing. Slowly, without touching, his dark eyes tracking from the hanging dried bundles to the refrigerated case to the hand-lettered price board her grandmother had painted in 1987, and that Amada had never once considered replacing. He stopped at the refrigerated case. He looked at the orchids for a long time. "White phalaenopsis," she said from behind the counter. "I get them in on Fridays." He turned. His neck tattoos were visible above his collar. Dark ink, intricate, the kind that announced a history without explaining it. His face was unreadable in the way of men who have made a discipline of it. "How much for everything in the case?" She thought he was being rhetorical. "Everything?" "Everything in the shop," he said. "The case, the counter display, the window arrangement. Everything available today." The number she quoted was the kind that should have made someone pause. He didn't pause. He reached into his interior jacket pocket, set an envelope on the counter, and said she could count it or trust it. She counted it. It was more than she'd quoted. She looked up. "There's extra," she said. "I know," he said. He carried nothing out. He sent 2 men in 10 minutes later with careful hands and a van, and within the hour her shop was stripped of every bloom she'd spent the week preparing. The shelves looked like the morning after a storm. She stood in the middle of it, with the envelope in her hand and a feeling she couldn't immediately name. Something between relief and unease. 2 sensations that had no business sitting that close together. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that the extra money in the envelope covered, almost exactly, 1 month of her adjusted lease payment. She didn't know that he knew that. What she knew was that her shop was empty, and that she had to call her supplier, and that her hands were shaking very slightly as she dialed. Outside, the black SUV pulled away from the curb, and in the back seat, Ji-ho looked straight ahead and said nothing, and the city moved past the windows like a river that didn't know it was being watched. 12:17. She restocked by Thursday. It had taken every favor she was owed from her supplier. 2 late nights repotting and trimming and arranging, and 1 very long conversation with herself about whether any of this was normal. She had decided it wasn't. She had also decided that normal was a category she could examine later, after the shelves were full again and the shop smelled like itself, and she could think without the particular distraction of financial relief she hadn't asked for. She had not spent the extra money. It sat in the envelope on the shelf behind the register, next to her grandmother's photograph, like an unanswered question. Sebastian walked in on Friday morning and stopped. The shop was full again. Dahlias and ranunculus and late-season peonies crowding the refrigerated case, the window dressed in something soft and autumnal that made the whole street look warmer from outside. He had come to see her, as he always did now, with a reason he had prepared, and would abandon the moment she looked up. But today, he didn't move past the doorway. Something had happened here. He could feel it, the way you feel a room where furniture has been rearranged. Everything is back, but the memory of the absence lingers. "You restocked," he said. "That's generally what you do when inventory runs out," she said. "It didn't run out," he said. "Someone bought it." She looked at him steadily. "Someone did." "Who?" The question came out with an edge he hadn't intended, or perhaps had intended more than he wanted to admit. Amara set down the stem she was trimming and gave him the full weight of her attention for the first time that morning, which was not a comfortable thing to be on the receiving end of. "A customer," she said. "Amara." Sebastian. The name landed between them differently than it had before. He heard it, the absence of his last name, the presence of only the part of him she had agreed to know. And because he was a man who understood leverage, even when he was the one without it, he recognized that she was using it now. She was telling him, very quietly, that he had not yet earned the right to ask that question. He bought a small bunch of white sweet pea. She had started keeping them in stock on Fridays, without commenting on the fact, and left. He sat in his car for 11 minutes before he made a call. The name came back to him within the hour. Kang Ti-ho. The kind of name that arrives with its own weather system. A slight drop in temperature. A recalibration of what kind of conversation you are now in. Sebastian knew the name the way people who move in certain circles know certain names. Not from direct contact, but from the particular way other people didn't say it in mixed company. He did something then that was either brave or catastrophically foolish, and which he would spend considerable time afterward being unable to categorize. He went to Jiho's building. He was received, which surprised him. He was shown to a room on the 14th floor that looked like an office and felt like a courtroom. Jiho was seated behind a desk that held almost nothing. A glass of water, a single document, and the quality of absolute patience that Sebastian found immediately destabilizing. He said what he had come to say. He said it with more confidence than he felt, which was the only skill his upbringing had given him that he was genuinely grateful for. He told Jiho that his family owned the building, that the shop was under Whitmore Properties' lease, that whatever interest Jiho had developed in the place, it would be wise to understand the existing structure. He had meant it to sound like information. It came out sounding like a warning. Jiho let it finish, and then was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who is deciding whether to explain something to a child. "I bought flowers," Jiho said. "Not a building. Not a woman. Flowers." "You spent enough to cover her rent?" "Yes." "Why?" Jiho looked at him with the particular clarity of someone who has never once confused what they want with what they feel. "Because I chose to," he said. "Is that the kind of answer you came here for?" Sebastian had no answer to that. He left the way people leave rooms where they have not one. Quickly, with their posture intact and their confidence quietly rearranged. That evening, Amara received a visitor she had not expected. Jiho appeared at 6, 4 minutes before closing, and stood at the counter while she counted the register. She didn't ask how he had found her still there. She didn't ask a great many things, because she had learned in the intervening days that he occupied space differently when she didn't fill it with questions. That silence, with him, was not absence, but a kind of language. "The man who comes in on Fridays," Jiho said. "You know who he is." It wasn't a question. She understood immediately that he knew she knew, and that he was not asking her to confirm it. He was asking her something else entirely, something about what she intended to do with the knowledge. "I know," she said. "He came to see me today." Her hands stilled on the register. "About me?" "About flowers," Jiho said, and there was something in his voice then. Not quite humor, not quite bitterness, something older and more weathered than either. Men like him always think they are talking about the thing they are actually talking about. She looked at him for a long moment. He was standing very still, the way he always did, and in the low evening light of the shop, the tattoos on his neck were dark against his skin, and his eyes were the color of deep water, and she thought, not for the first time, that he was the most controlled person she had ever been in the same room with. Controlled the way things are controlled that have a great deal of force behind them. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Actually. The question seemed to do something to the room. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I want nothing from you," he said finally. "I want something for you. There is a difference. I am still learning it myself." She closed the register. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door and held it open and waited. He left, and she locked up in the dark, standing alone in a shop full of flowers, with two men's versions of her life pressed against her from either side like walls that hadn't decided yet whether they were shelter or a trap. She had not asked to be wanted. She had not asked to be saved. And the fact that no one had thought to ask whether she wanted either was beginning to feel like the most important thing in the room. She made her decision on a Sunday, not because Sunday had any particular significance in the architecture of what had happened. No revelation had arrived with the morning light. No sign had presented itself in the arrangement of stems or the pattern of rain on the shop window. She made it on a Sunday because Sunday was the one day the shop was closed, the one day the city moved at a different speed, and she needed the world to be slightly quieter than usual in order to hear herself think without the interference of other people's versions of her life. She sat at the work table in the back, the one her grandmother had built from 2 sawhorses and a piece of reclaimed oak, and she spread out everything in front of her the way her grandmother had taught her to spread out a difficult arrangement. All the elements visible at once, nothing hidden, nothing decided yet. There was Sebastian's proposal, delivered 2 days prior in the careful language of a man who had learned to dress self-interest in the vocabulary of generosity. A renegotiated lease, symbolic rent, in exchange for the shop becoming, on select evenings, a backdrop for Whitmore family events. Cultural programming, he had called it. A partnership. He had said the word partnership 4 times in 8 minutes, which was 3 times more than the word required if it were actually what he meant. There was Chiho's document, delivered the day after with no vocabulary at all. Just a manila envelope placed on the counter with the quiet finality of a period at the end of a sentence. Inside it, the title deed to the commercial space. Transferred. Unconditional. Her name where the owner's name should be, in ink that was already dry. And there was the envelope that had been sitting behind the register for 11 days, next to her grandmother's photograph, still unopened after she had counted it and put it back and decided she needed more time to decide what it meant. She looked at all of it for a long time, Then she picked up her phone and called her friend Delia, who had helped her grandmother hang the original signage 41 years ago, and who was now 73 and sharp as a tack, and constitutionally incapable of telling anyone what they wanted to hear. "Two men want to save you," Delia said, after Amara had explained everything with the careful precision of someone who had been rehearsing the summary for days. "One wants to save you so you'll belong to him. The other wants to save you so he can forgive himself for someone he couldn't save before." "Yes," Amara said. "And you're calling me because you already know what to do and you want someone to tell you you're not crazy for doing it." "Yes," Amara said. "You're not crazy," Delia said. "Your grandmother would have done the same thing in half the time. Call me when it's done." She made 3 more calls before Monday morning. The first was to a woman named Priya, who ran a small business collective 2 neighborhoods over, and had been suggesting for 2 years that Amara consider a community ownership model, a structure in which loyal customers could contribute to a shared stake in the shop's future, receiving nothing in return except the knowledge that the thing they loved would continue to exist. Amara had always said she'd think about it. She had thought about it. She was done thinking. The second call was to her supplier, who agreed without hesitation to donate a portion of next week's stock as an in-kind contribution, because he had been selling to this shop for 19 years and had no interest in watching it disappear. The third call was to a web designer who owed her a favor from a wedding arrangement 3 years ago, and who built the campaign page in 4 hours flat, going live at midnight with a quiet, unadorned description of the shop, its history, and what it needed to survive. She did not post it on social media herself. She sent it to 11 people. 11 people sent it to others. By Tuesday morning, the campaign had been shared across the neighborhood, with the particular velocity of something that touches a nerve people didn't know they had. The nerve that rings when something real and irreplaceable is about to be lost, and someone finally says so out loud. By Wednesday evening, the campaign had exceeded its target. There were contributions from the woman who bought sunflowers every Friday for her mother's grave, from the restaurant owner on the corner who ordered centerpieces for every table twice a month, from the teenager who had been buying single stems with his lunch money since he was 14, because he liked the way the florist treated them like a real customer, from 47 others whose names she read one by one, sitting at the reclaimed oak table, with her grandmother's photograph facing her, and the city going quiet outside. Contributor number 47 had given an amount that was precise and anonymous, and which matched, almost exactly, the price of a single white Phalaenopsis orchid, multiplied by whatever number meant something to a man who had lost his mother in a flower shop in Seoul 19 years ago. She did not know this with certainty. She knew it the way you know certain things, not through evidence, but through the accumulated weight of paying attention. She did not contact him about it. She contacted Sebastian on Thursday morning, in writing, brief and without performance. She thanked him for his offer. She declined it. She told him that the shop was not a backdrop, and she was not a partnership. And she wished him well, with a sincerity that surprised even her, because somewhere in the architecture of his fumbling and his wanting and his inherited inability to understand what could not be purchased, she had recognized something genuinely lonely. And loneliness, her grandmother had always said, was the one thing you could not hold against a person. She returned Jiho's envelope on Friday. Not the money. That she had already deposited into the campaign account before the target was reached, anonymously, as a contribution from a grateful customer. The deed she returned in person, walking into the building that looked like a hotel at 9 in the morning and asking to see him, and being shown upstairs after a pause that suggested this did not happen often. He looked at the envelope for a moment without opening it. Then he looked at her. "It's yours," he said. "It was never mine," she said. "You can't give someone something they haven't agreed to receive. That's not giving. That's just placing." Something moved across his face. It was brief and unguarded, and she had the feeling she was seeing something he did not show to rooms or to people, or perhaps to himself very often. "The campaign," he said. "Succeeded," she said. "Without either of you." He was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother's shop." "My shop," she said. "Now." He nodded once. The nod of a man absorbing a correction he finds, on consideration, accurate. She left the building and walked back through the city in the thin autumn light, past the coffee shops and the construction hoardings, and the people who moved through the morning without looking at each other. And she turned onto Mercer Street and unlocked the gate at 10 minutes past 9 and flipped the sign from closed to open, and went inside and began sorting the day's first delivery: white ranunculus, eucalyptus, and a handful of dried lavender that smelled like memory. The shop smelled like itself. Outside, the city continued its negotiations with time and money, and the particular human hunger to possess what cannot be possessed. Inside, a woman with soil-darkened hands and her grandmother's shears built something beautiful out of things that were still living, and did not wait for anyone's permission to begin. Some weeks later, a man whose name she still never sent aloud began sending a standing weekly order: white orchids, single stem, no card, delivered to an address she never looked up. She fulfilled it without comment, every Friday, the way her grandmother had fulfilled every order, with care, and without needing to know the whole story. She had learned that from the flowers. You don't ask a thing to explain its roots. You just give it water and light, and enough room to grow in the direction it chooses. That was enough. That had always been enough. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever had someone try to rescue you in a way that felt more like a cage than a kindness, where the help came with strings you never agreed to, and saying no meant standing completely alone? Have you ever had to choose between accepting what was being offered and fighting for the right to build something on your own terms, even when your own terms were harder and lonelier and less certain? And has anyone ever underestimated you so completely that the moment you proved them wrong, you realized you weren't doing it for them at all? You were doing it for every version of yourself that almost believed what they said. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, autonomy, and the quiet power of choosing yourself, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.